the reason I stopped you is because you were riding on the sidewalk and you don't have a front light.
I don't have a front light?
Yeah.
I mean,
Stop, please stand.
Most police encounters end without violence. Some change in seconds. A decision is made, and it cannot be undone. What you are about to witness is not a story about two separate incidents. It is a story about how similar moments can lead to the same outcome. It begins in ordinary places, at ordinary moments, where nothing appears out of place. But within seconds, those moments shift, and what follows cannot be reversed. This documentary examines two officer-involved shootings that occurred in 2026. The first took place on March 24, 2026, in Dayton, near St. Clair Street and East 3rd Street. At the center of that encounter is Reginald Thomas, a 44-year-old man approached by officers from the Dayton Police Department during what began as a routine stop involving a bicycle violation. The second occurred on February 18, 2026, in Grand Rapids. The individual at the center is DeQuayne Johnson, a 32-year-old man who was approached by officers from the Grand Rapids Police Department and later pursued after attempting to leave the encounter. Both incidents unfolded in public spaces. Both involved brief interactions that escalated into physical confrontations, and both were captured on body-worn cameras later released to the public through official briefings. This is not just a story about two cases. It is a story about escalation, perception, and how quickly decisions are made in moments of uncertainty. What transforms a routine encounter into a fatal outcome is not a single decision, but a chain of moments, each one narrowing the options available until only one remains. On March 24, 2026, in Dayton, near St. Clair Street and East 3rd Street, Reginald Thomas, a 44-year-old man, is approached by an officer from the Dayton Police Department.
The reason I stopped you is because you were riding on the sidewalk and you don't have a front light.
I don't have a front light?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't no, you talking about on the other street?
Like you're coming down.
It wasn't it ain't no bike lane over there. That's why I got in the bike lane.
Okay.
There wasn't no bike lane.
The reason for the stop is minor, a bicycle-related violation involving riding on a sidewalk without proper lighting. At this stage, the encounter is structured and predictable. Reginald Thomas stands in front of the officer. The tone is calm. The officer prepares to conduct a pat-down.
So you need a front light?
I got a reflector?
No, it has to be a light, sir.
Damn.
What's your
I
name?
know that. Reginald Thomas.
Reginald? You got any weapons on you, man?
Nah.
Okay. You mind if I pat you down?
I get my
Yeah,
ID?
I'll get to that. I can pat you down.
And Reginald Thomas responds while keeping his hands visible. The officer indicates a pat-down, a limited protective search of outer clothing intended to check for weapons. This type of frisk is conducted during an investigative stop when there is reasonable suspicion that an individual may be armed and pose a danger. There is no visible urgency, no immediate threat. This is the baseline, a controlled environment shaped by routine procedure. But routine encounters depend on compliance. When that condition shifts, everything shifts with it. Without warning, Reginald Thomas runs.
On me, bro.
I'm patting you down.
For what? Why are you
Stop.
touching me? I'm uncomfortable, bro. Stop touching me, bro.
Dispatch, take it off for me. Send me another crew.
Stop touching me, bro. Stop.
In that instant, the encounter changes. What was a stop becomes a pursuit. What was controlled becomes uncertain. The officer reacts immediately, giving chase on foot. Reginald Thomas is now both a subject of a minor violation and a fleeing individual. This is the first contradiction. He is simultaneously low risk and high risk, depending on how his movement is interpreted. This is not simply escalation. This is perception redefining reality in real time.
Stop it! Bro!
The pursuit is brief. Distance closes quickly. There is no time to reset or reassess. The officer catches up, and physical contact is made. The encounter compresses further into a struggle. Commands are issued. Bodies shift. Hands move quickly, and positions change within seconds. The structure that defined the initial stop disappears. What replaces it is uncertainty, fast, physical, and difficult to interpret even when slowed down. Reginald Thomas is now both resisting and being restrained. This is the second contradiction. He is under direct physical control, yet the situation is not stable. Control exists, but it is incomplete. This is not resolution. This is tension under pressure.
He's got a gun! He's got a gun! Stop! Oh. Stop! Drop it! Drop it again!
In these moments, perception becomes critical. The officer must interpret movement, intent, and risk almost instantly. What is seen, what is believed, and what is feared begin to overlap. The difference between reaching, resisting, or complying becomes blurred. And in that blur, decisions are made. The officer fires a single shot. There is no extended buildup, no clear separation between stages. The sequence, from initial stop to fatal force, unfolds in less than a minute. The speed of the encounter does not allow for reflection. It allows only for reaction. Reginald Thomas falls. The movement stops. The encounter ends where it began, in a public space, but nothing about it remains routine. This is the third contradiction. The video is both clear and inconclusive. It shows everything, yet explains nothing on its own. This is not a failure of evidence. This is what limited perspective looks like. As the investigation continues, the focus shifts to policy and procedure. Was the use of force justified under the circumstances? Did the sequence of events meet the legal standard of perceived threat? These determinations rely on frameworks designed to interpret moments that unfold too quickly to fully understand in real time. But legal conclusions do not erase human consequences. Reginald Thomas becomes more than a participant in an encounter. His name becomes attached to a moment defined by speed, uncertainty, and irreversible outcome. The footage that captured his final moments continues to be replayed, not just as evidence, but as a reference point in a larger conversation. This is the final layer of the case. Not just what happened, but what remains. A routine stop became a pursuit. A pursuit became a struggle. A struggle became a decision. And that decision reshaped everything that followed. But if uncertainty during movement can lead to fatal force, what happens when the encounter continues beyond pursuit, into a moment where control appears to have already been established? Not every fatal encounter begins with immediate chaos. Some begin with movement that appears controllable, situations that seem to be stabilizing, where the risk is not escaping control, but existing within it. On February 18, 2026, in Grand Rapids, DeQuayne Johnson, a 32-year-old man, is approached by officers from the Grand Rapids Police Department. It is 9:30 on a Wednesday night in the southeast side of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Unlike the Dayton case, this encounter does not begin with a visual observation by a patrolling officer. It begins with information. A tip, later described as coming from a confidential informant, reaches the Grand Rapids Police Department. The report states that a person is traveling around the southeast side of the city with a firearm. Officers locate DeQuayne Johnson near Miss Tracy's liquor store, riding a bicycle. He is 32 years old and a father of 3 daughters.
Stop! Please stand by!
Officers attempt to stop Johnson. He does not comply. He rides away. Dashcam footage shows the pursuit through the southeast side of Grand Rapids as Johnson rides his bicycle with police lights and sirens behind him. He turns into the parking lot of Eastern Lofts on Eastern Avenue SE. He dismounts his bicycle. He slips and falls to the ground.
Get on the ground! Hands up! No, hey, show your hand! He's reaching!
The pursuit does not last long. Officers close the distance. What follows is not continued flight, but contact. DeQuayne Johnson is brought to the ground with the assistance of a K-9 unit. This moment marks a critical shift in the encounter. The chase ends. Physical control begins. Officers restrain DeQuayne Johnson on the ground. Movement is restricted. The structure of the encounter changes again, from pursuit to restraint. At this point, the situation appears contained. The subject is no longer running. The environment is controlled. Officers are physically present and engaged. This is where the second contradiction emerges. DeQuayne Johnson is simultaneously restrained and still perceived as a potential threat. Control exists physically, but uncertainty remains cognitively. The encounter does not resolve when the body is controlled. It continues in interpretation. During the struggle on the ground, officers report the presence of a firearm. This claim becomes central to the interpretation of the moment. The focus shifts from movement to intent, from pursuit to perceived danger. But perception in these moments is compressed. Officers are not reviewing events. They are reacting within them. Every movement is interpreted in real time, where hesitation itself can be considered risk.
Grab his right arm. I need you to grab his right arm. Grab his right arm. I got the dog. Dog's good. Hey, dog's right arm. Right arm. Stop reaching, man. You're gonna get shot. Oh, he's got a fucking gun. He's got a gun in his hand. Let him go. Let him go. Drop the gun. Drop the gun.
DeQuayne Johnson is held down. Officers maintain physical contact. Commands are issued. The situation is dynamic but contained. Yet within this containment, a critical decision point emerges. A shot is fired. The transition from restraint to lethal force occurs within the same physical space where control had already been established. There is no reset between phases. The encounter does not restart. It intensifies within its own limits. DeQuayne Johnson is fatally wounded. But the moment of the shot is not the end of the encounter. It is the beginning of its interpretation. Once the scene is secured, the focus shifts from action to explanation. Body cam footage becomes central evidence. Investigators review timing, positioning, and officer perception. This is where justification begins. The central question becomes not only what happened, but what was believed to be happening. Did officers reasonably perceive a threat during restraint? Was the use of force consistent with policy under rapidly evolving conditions? These questions define the investigative process, but they do not resolve the emotional or public response. The same footage is analyzed differently depending on perspective.
Becomes this fourth thing, self-defense. The fourth thing, I have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the shooting was not justified or excused due to self-defense or defense of others. They're pretty much the same thing under the law, but when you look at this, we have to show first, at the time the defendant must have honestly and reasonably believed that he was in a danger of being killed or seriously wounded.
You can see in this video, there's a 45-degree angle. It's indicative of somebody reaching for something, and that's something that's trained in. That's something that's well known in the police community. When somebody's reaching for something, you don't know if it's a gun, it could be a cell phone, could be nothing, but that 45-degree angle gives officer concern of, okay, what's that person reaching for?
The same footage is analyzed differently depending on perspective. To some, it reflects a justified response to perceived danger, aligning with legal standards that prioritize an officer's reasonable belief of an immediate threat. Prosecutors often rely on this standard, concluding that if the officer's perception was deemed reasonable in that moment, even if later questioned, it does not meet the threshold required to pursue criminal charges.
It is an assassination. 3 shots to the back while he's face down, while a dog is ripping him limb for limb with bites all over his body, and yet they shoot him 3 times from behind.
To others, it reflects escalation within a controlled situation that did not require lethal force. Attorneys representing DeQuayne Johnson argue that the encounter had already reached a point of restraint, where he was face down and physically subdued. They described the shooting, 3 shots fired into his back, as excessive and characterize it as an execution rather than a defensive act. This is the third contradiction. The footage is consistent, but interpretation is not. It shows the same sequence, yet produces different conclusions. This is not confusion in evidence. It is divergence in meaning. In both Dayton and Grand Rapids, the encounters involving Reginald Thomas and DeQuayne Johnson followed different paths, but arrived at a similar outcome. One began with flight during a minor stop. The other ended in restraint after pursuit. Yet both situations transitioned into lethal force within seconds. Across both cases, body-worn camera footage became the central record. It provided clarity in sequence, but not in meaning. It showed what happened, but not fully why it was interpreted the way it was. This is where the deeper tension emerges. Control does not always prevent escalation. Perception does not always align with intention. And legal justification does not always resolve public understanding. What remains is not a single explanation, but a pattern of outcomes shaped by speed, perception, and irreversible consequence. Are we prepared to examine how these moments are created before they happen again? Subscribe, like, comment, and share, because these conversations shape how accountability and understanding move forward.